my dad had a strong patriarchal line that taught him some of these things. His dad was first generation Green Beret, and so that, taught that way. But he also had a really fucked up childhood with a humongous amount of trauma. His dad committed suicide, his sister committed suicide, many of his family members were in and out of incarceration and mental institutions. And the violence of the childhood he was in, he's covered in physical scars from weapons, like he had a rough go of it. And so some of what he got directly, but a lot of it was his way to not kill himself was to say, maybe he's not crazy, the entire world is crazy, because the whole world he was exposed to seemed completely crazy to him. And he'd rethink everything from scratch. And so when you do that, you come up with a lot of good and interesting things, and also are going to make a lot of mistakes, and they're painful parts in the process. And I didn't emphasize those in that letter because it wasn't the purpose of the letter, the article. But, my path benefited from all the extreme gifts, and it had some like quite interesting hardships as a result of the complexity of who he was from transcending his life. All those other things is what got me into therapy young, and which I'm also very grateful for, because then I ended up getting a huge amount of, basically parenting from the therapeutic traditions. The reason I say that is so that people don't think, oh, well, I can't do well because I had trauma, because I didn't have some of these gifts. Everybody's life has some gifts and has some fucked up stuff, and the difficult stuff, the healing of it, is what catalyzes their gifts. And I just wanted to say that. And some of the gifts that he had were really fairly rare and unusual. And I'm very grateful for that. Some of the issues he had were somewhat unusual. But when it comes to one of the things on the forgive, he definitely had the gift of being physically heroic. And there are military men who are trained in that. A lot of people are not in this age physically heroic. In previous ages, that was much more common. And there was a time here in Encinitas, when I was like 20, which is usually not a violent area. My dad was in the parking lot on thoroughfare here, El Camino Real. Gunshots rang out, handful of gunshots from a blind store. And everybody who was in the parking lot ran the other way or dropped. My dad ran straight at the blind store. He figured the shooter was still alive and in there. Turned out the shooter, after killing the other person, killed himself. So by the time my dad got in there, the shooter was dead. It was a husband who was going in there to homicide his wife. But he shot himself. He stabbed her. And when he thought he had finished killing her, then he shot himself. When my dad got there, she was bleeding out, but not dead. And so he started to put compression and tourniquets and whatever on, all the areas while the ambulance and police came. But then he went to the hospital to be with her, and then followed up with her afterwards. And in addition to she would have bled out if he was not there, saving her life, was him wanting to make sure that she could forgive her husband for that, because of knowing how fucked up he was, and that he's no longer, in pain himself or risk to anybody else. But that was it was his default mode. And I mean, almost too fast that it can be a bypass. But in that moment, it was both. And, just a very interesting thing about him is thinking the shooter was still alive, he thought, I can keep my body moving long enough if I take shots that I can take him out and more civilians won't get killed, which means he was willing to risk his life for people he had never met, couldn't even see to know what color they were or race or whatever. This is very noble, it's very beautiful. And then the moment the harm of the dying was out of the way, the harm of her holding on to that grudge and resentment was the next one he was focused on.